Hello, today we're going to talk about something that is a burning issue on everyone's mind, and that is Reconstitution.
Yeah, we know you guys couldn't sleep last night because of how much you were thinking about Reconstitution. And don't worry, today we're going to clear the air. We're going to talk about it.
Put it on the table so everyone knows, right?
Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So even though you probably haven't heard the word Reconstitution, you have heard something about it recently, which was when Tesla entered the S&P 500 index with a bang. It went from not in it to number one.
Yeah, this is one of those things that, like, behind the scenes, quite likely or potentially affects a lot of your investments, and you just don't know it. You don't realize it. So we're going to talk about what Reconstitution is, how it affects you. But before we do that, to kind of give you a better understanding and some context around what an index is, that's oftentimes, you've heard people all the time to invest in the stock market. That's very simple and very beginner advice, and it's advice that we would give somebody, without knowing a full picture. Yes, invest in the stock market. If you've got extra cash flow, that's a great way to save for the future. A great way to see good returns. There's risk associated with the stock market, but you've got that higher return as well. One element to that to be a little more specific is you'll hear, some people, some TV voices that will come at you and say to buy an indexed fund or to buy an index, to invest your money in the S&P 500 as one of those examples, or the Russell 2000, or there's these big indexes. Now you can't, and I think we've mentioned this on a video in the past, you can't invest directly into the S&P 500. You couldn't. That's not a company. That's not a vehicle that you can put your money into. What it is a group of vehicles. The S&P 500 is 500 companies that Standard & Poor's, which is where the S&P comes from, creates this list of their top 500 companies that they essentially deem worthy of the S&P 500 for whatever reason.
Largest companies, in the U.S.
So the index funds, there's lots of mutual fund companies that will go out there and say, hey, you can invest your money with us, and we'll create this indexed fund or index fund. And what that does is essentially follows whatever those indexes are. So there's, the Vanguard and Fidelity and all these different mutual fund companies have their own indexed fund mutual funds where you can invest your money, and you're essentially investing in those 500 stocks. Now, what's really important about that, and where this kind of gets into the topic of Reconstitution, is investing in those funds. One of the biggest benefits is there's very little work on the fund managers, right? So there's somebody behind the scenes in any kind of fund that is picking and choosing what stocks go into a fund. In these indexed funds, they don't have to pick and choose that because the index does it. So if it's a fund that's following the S&P 500, it's going to follow to a T what's in the S&P 500. And then we've got this element of Reconstitution that we'll talk about in a minute. But just one other thing that I think is important to understand is the difference between passive and active fund management. So how would you explain that in terms of what an index fund would be?
Yeah, definitely a passive fund. And that's because the manager is not actively trying to outperform any particular index by choosing and picking stocks that they think will outperform other stocks that are available to them. They are just trying to replicate the S&P and the associated percentages of each stock within it as close as possible to what the S&P or Standard & Poor's really says it's got to be. I mean, they don't tell the funds they have to do that. The funds have adopted that as their mission. And an actively managed fund is, again, back to that picking. I think one stock's going to do better than the other. And I think I have information no one else has. So that's why I think I know it's going to happen. But what we know is most information is publicly available and already priced into the value of a stock. And if it's not publicly available, you pretty sure should not be trading on it because you might go to jail. So yeah, it's difficult to outperform index funds over time.
Yeah.
And definitely if you can capture market returns, you will have a successful investing experience, and indexing can help you do that. It's not the be all and end all, though, as far as investing.
But a great start.
It is. Definitely. It is better than
and it's cheap.
making bets, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's cheap, kind of that passive versus active.
Yeah.
It's really inexpensive because there's not a lot of work. Whereas those active guys that are saying, I've got the the right calculations that I'm going to beat the index funds, they're charging you for that. Those are typically more expensive.
Quite a bit.
Those are those fees that so many people just don't even know they're there.
They're not very visible.
Yeah.
You have to know to look for them for sure. And so, yes, next to the way that we invest, I would say indexing is a very good alternative as far as having a successful investing experience because of the fees. You have broad diversification, usually hundreds of stocks. And then there's some nuances to that, to picking stocks versus bonds and international versus U.S., but we're not going to get into that part today. So, but indexing does have some weaknesses. And probably one of the largest ones is that word, reconstitution. And what happens is once a year, the S&P, Russell, Wilshire, Morgan Stanley, any of these big index because they just define the index, will change what's in the index. And so stocks will come out and some will go in. And so what happens is it's reconstituted to this new, prescribed amount of stocks and in amounts and names of companies. So what they do is S&P will announce about a month ahead of time, or all these indices, what will be added to or subtracted from an index. So that gives people who want to kind of gamble and play in the system a month to know that all these index funds, and there are a lot of them and they're very large, are going to have to buy or sell a particular stock on a particular day. And so active managers will start buying the stock, and you'll actually be able to see, we have Tesla, back to Tesla, was a recent example of that. And so we have this graph where you can see that Tesla, where that blue line is, that is the day that it was announced that Tesla was going to go into the S&P 500 index. And then you can see the shaded area, which is plus 5 or minus days around the addition. But you can see what happened to the stock price. It was up from the day it was announced to the day it was reconstituted. The stock price was up over 70%. And then the following week, it dropped 4.8%. So what happens is people push the price up because it is a supply and demand issue to a large degree as well. And then when the funds have been reconstituted, the price dropped because there was not that push, that volume of support to purchase. And so what an index fund would give up is that artificial increase in value, and they end up holding a stock that's actually a lot more expensive than it was a month ago, and not necessarily for fundamental reasons. So indexing can actually cost you money in a weird way.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting. We talked about several different kinds of analogies or different ways to kind of help you understand that, and it's kind of difficult to think that or to really process that and understand really what's happening there. But it's to again kind of reiterate. The S&P, as the example that we're giving here, came out and said, what was the actual date? So I think that's
November 16th.
On November 16th, came out and said, we're going to add Tesla to our list of 500 stocks inside the S&P 500. But we're not doing that until December 18th. Mm-hmm. So they came out and announced it. So now there's this almost insider information kind of element that everybody has. But the indexed funds, the ones that are following the S&P index fund, they can't buy into that until it actually happens because they're following it to a T. So now you have this information that, hey, wait a minute, all these index funds are about to buy Tesla. It makes sense to maybe make that kind of investment early on, and a lot of people do that, which jacks that price up. So then when the S&P comes in, when the index funds comes in and buys those, and if that's what you're invested in, that's you. As your money is now coming in and buying Tesla at a much higher price than it was just a month earlier.
Yep.
And what was that return in just a month?
70.3%.
That 70.3% was that
huge
return that everybody that bought it as soon as it was announced got, but the S&P 500 did not. And actually, the S&P 500 itself
was up, 2.3% in the same time period.
So that's the difference. And while the S&P again has that diversification, and Tesla is one stock, so you would expect some differences there, just in that respect. But it lost out of that 70 increase. And then as soon as it bought in, it stabilized and kind of you didn't see that
dropped a bit.
big growth.
Yeah. So one of the things we love about the fund company that we primarily use is it is somewhat passive in that they're not trying to pick necessarily one food producer is better than the other. What they do is say, are they both good? Do they both produce? Do they have both the positive returns? And they buy them that way, but they avoid this reconstitution effect because they're not index funds. And so they can just wait for this, either buy it ahead or wait for the stock price to drop, because sometimes it can be quite precipitous after the big trading reconstitution day.
Yeah.
And so that way you can capture more return.
If you think about this would work in reverse just the same, where the S&P would, and actually, I don't know what came out when Tesla went in, but there's 500 stocks, and in the same reconstitution process, they'll announce and say these stocks or these companies are being removed from the S&P 500. And somebody like, Dimensional, if they haven't done that already, they can go in and remove those if it makes sense.
Because you'll see generally quite a steady decline.
Yeah, because it's that
from
same
announcement going
it's
forward.
That same thought of hearing that announcement and thinking, wait a minute, all these index funds are about to sell this. Let me sell it now before it sees that dip.
Yeah. So again, we think indexing is great. It's not perfect. Some people think it is, but it's not perfect. But there are some weaknesses to it as well. But overall, it's better than, I think, really trying to outperform something you really don't have to outperform to have a successful investment experience. You just need to capture market returns and hopefully a bit more over time. So we hope this was educational, and now you can sleep tonight because we've had a full explanation of Reconstitution.
We got you through the Reconstitution discussion, yeah.
Again, always feel free to call us or email us. Our website is summitfinancialpartnersrva.com.
Thank you very much.